And you're on the.
So welcome to Trail Talk. I'm John St. Clair and I'm your Zoom host for this month's Trail Talk. And I'm one of the members of the committee that plans and produces the Trail Talk series. This month's Trail Talk is Backpacking 101. Next month's Trail Talk topic is the what is it called?
Catalina.
Trans-Catalina Trail. And
Yes.
Is that the right term?
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Trans-Catalina Trail. And we'll have someone talking about the trail and the camps and how to hike across Catalina Island. So that'll be a wonderful topic next month as well. And I want to point out that if you have to leave this meeting early, or if you want to see past topics of Trail Talk, we have a San Gorgonio chapter has a YouTube channel. And I believe, let's see, I better double check and make sure I put the right link in there. I'm going to paste in the link for the San Gorgonio chapter. Yep, I found it. Okay, into the chat section. I'll do that right now. Okay, so I just put into the chat section the link to the San Gorgonio chapter YouTube channel. Plus, you should have received an email from me reminding you of this meeting, and the link is in that email message as well. So I want to go over a couple of rules for this Zoom session. First of all, everyone but the speakers should be on mute. So if you haven't already, please mute yourself. Looks like everybody is muted except for our speakers. And if you have questions, the chat section is the place to write those questions until the whole panel's over, at which time we'll take questions verbally. But on the bottom of your screen, there's a little talking bubble icon with the word chat under it. If you click on that on the right-hand side of your screen, the chat section opens up. The default is send a message to everyone, and you can type your questions in there, and we'll have a couple people monitoring that can answer those questions during the presentation. And then at the end, if you have other questions, you can take the mute off and ask them after the presentation is over. So that pretty well covers the rules. In fact, I will mute myself in just a minute after I introduce Julianne Anderson, who's also a member of the organizing committee for Trail Talk and is also an outings leader with the San Gorgonio chapter. So Julianne, I'm going to remove my spotlight and you can start talking. And I'm going to mute myself.
Thanks, John. Very kind. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Backpacking 101. We're trying something new this week or this month, a panel. And we're going to use the wide range of experiences, experience levels, people that have hiked and backpacked abroad, people that have backpacked on national trips, local trips, and trips of varying difficulty. To kind of add to our experience here, we wanted to give you just a thumbnail sketch of the wide range of skills and considerations we need to have when backpacking. So we want people to get into backpacking because it's such a delight and an important thing to do and to get us out into nature. I wanted to properly introduce our panel, and without further ado, let me do that. First, Marianne Ruiz is our chair of the chapter, and it comes to backpacking from family experience. And she writes Marianne's first trip camping with family was the annual trek to Yosemite as a baby in 1951. She feels very fortunate to have experienced these trips every summer growing up. By the time she was 9, her family began backpacking, and that led to her love of waking up surrounded by wide open natural spaces. Backpacking trips throughout Yosemite National Park became summer adventures into young adulthood. In 2006, Marianne renewed this interest, joining National Sierra Club multi-day trips into many of our Sierra wilderness areas, and one other trip for 10 days on the Continental Divide Trail. Nice. Retired in 2016, Marianne still enjoys camping, hiking, and spending time outdoors. Marianne Reese has been an outings leader with our local chapter since 2004 and has been chapter chair for the past 6 years. So welcome, Marianne, to the panel. I'd also like to introduce David Melton. And Dave is in Spain. It is 4 a.m. on Thursday morning in Spain. So thank you, Dave, for getting up pre-dawn to talk to us in California. Outstanding. Dave's first backpack was a Sierra Club local outing back in 1986. He has been a national outings backpack leader since 2006. He's led backpacks for the Big Bear Group and is currently involved in setting up a conservation-focused outings program for the Talkett's Group. So thank you, Dave. Welcome. I'd also like to introduce Carla Kellums, who is also on the committee for Trail Talk, and she writes. Carla is an outings chair, Mountains Group, Sierra Club executive committee member. Over 20 years of experience backpacking, short trips from 2 to 4 days. She started off backpacking as an economically challenged college student and evolved her backpacking skills to include the whole family, including the dog. Her son went on his first family backpacking trip when he was 5 years old. Some of her favorite places to backpack: Goldmeyer Hot Springs in Washington, Killen Lake Shores Trail in Washington, Lake Washington, Washington, Joshua Tree, California, Fisherman's Camp in San Bernardino National Forest, California. Welcome, Carla. Thank you for joining the crew. And the ever modest Joseph Amador, Joe. I asked Joe for a biography and he said, Julianne, you can just introduce me as a fair weather backpacker. So, but I will say, Joe is a delight to hike with, and he is a frequent hiker and backpacker, and he has backpacked abroad. He has backpacked the Camino in Spain and Hadrian's Wall in Great Britain, and doubtless others that I don't know of. So, a couple of things I would like to point out that Dave has suggested. Due to sound quality, I wasn't able to add this video, but Dave found a delightful video. It's a Sierra Club video. You can find it on YouTube. It's about 3 minutes. It's called Why Backpackers Do It. For some reason, we had sound issues on the Zoom, so we elected not to do it, but go and check it out. Why Backpackers Do It. And a couple of interns produced it for the Sierra Club, and it's just a terrific short video. The other thing that I hope Joe references that he found and pointed out is from the Sierra Club magazine, March, April of this year, March, April 2021. It's a pullout, Backpacking on the Cheap. And I think Marianne might be able to find the link to that. But yes, there it is, Joe. Backpacking on the cheap, and really important ideas about how to save money, because this can be an expensive business, at least starting out. And it's good to, spend the money where you have to and economize where you can. So finally, As John mentioned, my name's Julianne Anderson. I'm an outings leader with the San Gorgonio chapter. I've backpacked off and on over the past 30 years in the High Sierra and local Southern California mountains. So welcome all. I am going to share my screen and start our PowerPoint, and then various of us are gonna comment on various screens where we will, and everyone feel free to chime in. And audience, please ask questions as you will. The chat is always a good option. So here we go. We're sharing screen. Hold on. Okay, go. There we are. Can everyone see?
No, I do not see a shared screen.
Okay, let's check it out. Oh. Okay. Hold on just a sec, folks. Let's see here. Hold on. I'm having a little technical difficulty, all.
You don't see the share screen button?
I've lost that bar, the bottom. Here we go. Okay, now I've gotten it back. Let's see about the other bar. Hold on just a second. Their desktop.
Okay, now we're seeing your desktop.
Now can you see?
We can see your desktop.
Very good. Okay.
So start.
Very good. Do you see the here we go. Do you see that?
You're in.
Okay, good. So here's our PowerPoint. We're doing our Trail Talk Backpacking 101, and we wanted to talk about just a few moments, why do we backpack? And we had a few musings that the five of us were thinking about, things like wilderness, solitude. Let's start with Dave, since you're zooming in from so far, Dave. What are your reasons for backpacking? Why do you do it?
I think among the many possible reasons, for me, one of the really key things is I like spending the entire day out in the wilderness. It's nice to see the sun go down, the change, the birds come out and so forth, and also then wake up in the wilderness. An additional point is that as we backpack, we get further in, we see fewer people and there's more isolation, which is also really nice.
Yeah, I agree. Carla, why do you backpack?
I think for me, it's the solitude. It's going out where you don't past where the people are doing their day hikes, and just having nature to yourself. I think once you get out into the wilderness, you start appreciating all the biodiversity that's out there.
I agree completely. It's just a beautiful experience. Now, here's some considerations that we wanted to go over with everyone. Conditioning, your schedule for the backpacking trip, time of year, weather, your destination and obtaining permits, gear and money. How do you How do you get it without breaking the bank? Or, if you want to break the bank, what you should select. Food and water, going with a group versus a small group or solo, and preparation. So let's start with conditioning. Let's talk a little bit about this. Joe and Dave, give us your thoughts about conditioning. Joe, you want to start?
Well, you definitely have to be in condition because you're carrying a load that you're not normally used to in day hikes or even car camping. So you need to be in such a shape you're able to carry that, condition yourself, and go for several miles in sometimes difficult situations.
Right. And Dave, how do you usually train, or how do you suggest that people train?
One key thing is simply hiking itself. So there's a tremendous value in the day hiking that we do. And I think for younger folks, if they're hiking, they're usually in good shape. Once people hit more about 40, I also really like to see people doing a gym component of doing leg exercises, lunges, balance exercise, and even some upper body work as well, so that they can more easily handle the pack. So what I personally do is a mix of hiking and working out in the gym.
Good. 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 Okay. Scheduling, time of year, weather. Let's talk a little bit about whether we want to have a hike in the high summer, if we want to do it on shoulder season, spring or fall, or whether we even want to do a winter season. And then if we do it in the summer, the difference between July versus September. Let's start with Carla and Marianne. Any thoughts on your scheduling and time of year?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're going. You want to schedule a time of year if you are going to be wanting that access to water. Sometimes the springtime is a good time to go. But also some people really enjoy the change in the colors. So some really enjoy the fall time. But I think you really need to watch the weather and make sure that you have some sort of an weather forecast that lets you know if the conditions are going to be appropriate for a backpacking. You don't want to be backpacking if there's a big snowstorm coming in, or if it's going to be 110 degrees outside. So I think the weather is very important.
Well, we'll talk about fire safety in a minute, but is there a date after which you don't go backpacking, say in September, if you're planning to go up into the mountains? Anyone?
Sure. I think that again, it depends on where you're going, and are you going up to 10,000 feet, or are you going to Joshua Tree? So
Right.
It definitely depends on where you're going, and watching the weather. But if you are going up into the High Sierra, once you hit mid-September, you are likely, or even early September, you're definitely likely to have rain often, especially in the afternoon thunderstorms, which you can also get in August. But you can be in for some very cold nights and a possible snowstorm. So watching the weather is very important in September. And then, of course, with the current issues that we're experiencing with climate change, June might be a better time to try backpacking, because the fire season starts in June and it goes all summer, and you have to be very careful where you are. You don't want to be caught out in a fire. So
Right.
It's much more difficult to plan in current conditions.
Right. We were just talking before the program. The fires up by Lake Tahoe were the first to actually go from west to east over the crest of the Sierra. They've never gone that high before. So I think in our planning, we really have to take this kind of safety into consideration. So yeah, maybe early June. Just a thought about water and mosquitoes. Can anyone talk about, if we had a normal year where we're having a normal melt in, say, June or July, what will we expect versus later in the summer?
I'd be happy to talk about that one. A heavy mosquito can just ruin a trip. So that's one of the things you definitely want to keep in mind. If there's a heavy winter, you might want to go later in the season. If you're at altitude at 10, 11,000 feet, sometimes summer doesn't start till August, and then you get mosquitoes at that time of year. So just be aware and plan accordingly, because mosquitoes can, if they're really bad, they can just ruin a trip.
Right, right. Destinations and permits. Let's talk a little bit about popular versus less popular destinations and how to obtain a permit for all of these.
Can I insert a question?
Let's say, yes, of course.
So we got a question in the chat that goes back to training.
Yes.
And Cheryl Herman said, how do you train for the change in altitude? That was extremely difficult for me.
Dave, you want to try to talk about that?
Well, obviously the ideal answer would be to train at altitude, but that's not really practical for a lot of us. A big thing, there's two separate concepts that it's easy to conflate. One is, do you simply get altitude illness? Do you get headache and do you get nausea? One way to manage that, the only is to show up at the trailhead a day or two early and spend some time at altitude. The susceptibility to altitude illness actually goes down as you get older. So in terms of whether you can get a headache or nausea, aging is better. So that's a little bit of a warning sometimes for young people that otherwise are quite fit, is they may be a little more susceptible to altitude illness, particularly adolescents, 16-year-olds. So that can be a little bit of a caution. But for all of us, spending the night at the trailhead, also being well hydrated is one of the things we can control. So it's easy to get up to the mountains, be excited, start engaging with our friends, and not take care of ourselves in terms of water. The other aspect for altitude, since most of us live close to sea level, is just to seek out opportunities, is just to be in good shape. So if you're going to go on an 8-mile backpack, you should be day hiking 8 miles. You should be going beyond 8 miles. So you should be looking for day hikes that are greater difficulty than the distances that you're going to do on your backpack trip. So there's a really strong correlation between whether you are in shape versus how much you enjoy the trip.
Right. And what are your thoughts about aspirin?
I haven't personally used aspirin. If I have a headache, then I'll take some ibuprofen.
I've tried aspirin for altitude sickness, and it helps me fairly quickly. So
Good.
that might be a thought too. But hydration, I think, is even deeper than that. Any other questions? Great question. Great question. Destinations and permits. Carla, can you talk a little bit about popular destinations versus less popular and how you go about getting your permits?
Yeah, I'm as far as getting the permit, I'm probably not the best person to talk about that. So I'll pass that on to somebody else. But usually what I do is I look for places that are not really on the beaten path, places that are looked over because of certain things, maybe because it's a little bit more strenuous, maybe because it's not in the most ideal location. I like to pick locations where permits are not required because I'm kind of a spontaneous backpacker. I like to backpack, just, have a weekend open, boom, put on my pack and go somewhere. So I'm gonna let somebody else talk about how they obtain their permits because I usually don't go that route.
Dave and Joe?
Normally we get wilderness permits on recreation.gov. Once again, recreation.gov. And generally they're available 6 months in advance. So the main thing to do is just to have that marked on your calendar. So if you have an idea of when you want to go, just be on there and just be ready to get your permit. It helps to have some flexibility in your dates. I want to reinforce what Carla said about going to areas that you want to go to, not just because it looks good on social media. You don't have to go to Mount Whitney. There are so many wonderful places to go. In some areas that are less busy might not even have a quota, and that means you can always get a permit. Trail Pass Trailhead in the Golden Trout Wilderness is one of those. That's fairly accessible to us here in Southern California. If you go further north, get up into Humboldt, Tyabe around Bridgeport, that area, I think just because of the distance is also less popular. So those, so as Carla said, try to get off the beaten path a little bit.
And Marianne, do you want to talk about going with national trips?
Yes, when you sign up on a national trip, the leader has already gotten all the permits. So this is something that you don't really have to worry about if you sign up for a national trip. So that's a really a good thing. You can look at the schedule online for national trips, and that's just one thing you don't have to worry about is getting a permit. I could talk more about other parts of national trips later on when it applies, but
Yeah.
that's one advantage, national Sierra Club trips, or even some of the local, Angeles chapter does a lot of overnight backpacks, as does, we have a couple of leaders here that are doing them, and they're already getting the permit. So look on both San Gorgonio, Angeles, and the national trip schedule, which I'll put in the chat.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Gear and money. Do we borrow gear? Do we rent gear? Do we buy gear? This is a really important consideration if you're new to backpacking, because it can be several $100s of outlay. So planning your strategy to get the gear that you need is important, and to not wait till the last minute to get your gear. Some places rent or loan. I know if you're a student at UCR, their outdoor excursions program has a program where they rent gear. I know REI used to rent it. I think that's far less than in the past, but they have some other options. So let's talk a little bit about borrowing, renting, and buying. Dave, do you want to start us off?
That's a little bit speechless. It is, I think for beginning backpackers, it's important not to break the bank initially, especially if you're not sure that you're really going to get seriously into backpacking. One option is if you have older backpacking friends, they frequently have acquired gear through the years and maybe they have an old pack that's still serviceable that they just aren't using. So I would encourage, especially if you're a younger person and you get connected with some more experienced backpackers, is just to be bold and just to ask, hey, do you have a pack you're not using? Do you have a tent that you maybe need some seam sealing, but hey, you can do that? And, can I borrow? Or a lot of my older gear I've just given away to younger folks.
Right. Carla, what's your method?
Yeah, so when I was a economically challenged student, I kind of looked at alternatives to some of the gear that you need. Majority of my gear that I started out with came from an Army surplus store. I didn't use conventional tents. I learned by friends and reading books, checking out from the library. I learned how to make tarp shelters. So I didn't use a tent. I used what's called a bivy bag, which is just a cover that goes over your sleeping bag. And I would make a tarp shelter, and I would just go get a tarp at the hardware store and some rope. And, that's kind of how I did it when I was younger. But I do want to emphasize what Dave said. If you do have friends that do backpack, they usually upgrade their gear on a regular basis, especially if they're really into it. And you can always, buy stuff from them at the cheap, or they'll most likely give you stuff. And that's where I've gotten most of my stuff that I have actually now.
Joe, do you want to touch on some of the points from that Sierra article?
Yeah, also the Sierra article is online on sierramagazine.org, and just go into archives and it'll hit the little article there, but it's all it's pointing out is there's all sorts of resources, secondhand stores, thrift stores, friends, neighbors that you can use. And also like to remind everybody that there's a little story about Grandma Gatewood, who one of the first ladies that did the Appalachian Trail on her own. Her tent was a shower curtain, and she was an example of ultralight backpacking.
Right. Yes.
You can use a wide variety of.
It doesn't have to be expensive.
No.
It does not. So I think these are all great examples. And the article that Joe was referencing is the March-April edition of Sierra Magazine from this year, from 2021. So some great ideas. If you do choose to go to retail, are you guys all REI consumers, or are there other places that you like to go as well?
I like REI Outlet and their garage sale. They have a garage sale of used equipment, and then they're starting to put used equipment on their outlet. And the Sierra Club article is in the chat for anybody that wants it there. Thanks.
Beautiful. Great. Dave?
When I lived in Portland, I went to specialty stores quite frequently because typically the staff there has been at that store for 10 or 15 years. In Southern California, it seems like we largely have REI, and REI does have many wonderful employees, but sometimes it can be a little hit and miss. So when you go to REI, if you don't think you're getting the service you need, then come back another time and try to find someone who's really on top of things.
Good idea. Good idea. All right. Types of gear. As we know, we have our backpack, our tents, boots and clothing, sleeping bags and pads, stove and kitchen gear, etc. So let's start kind of just touching on each of these so we have a survey of what to expect. Backpacks. Internal frames, the rare but well-loved external frames, size and volume considerations, compartments, and fitting. Let's start talking about what kind of backpack we should buy. Carla, do you want to start us out?
Yeah. I had my first backpack was an old Army surplus external frame, but now I do have an Osprey internal frame. I think for me, what I really like is having pouches on the outside so I can access things quickly, like sunscreen, water, snacks, things that I want to access on a regular basis. And then everything that I don't need to access right away, I go ahead and put it in the depth of the bag. And that seems to work out good for me.
Right. Joe, what did you use on the Camino in Europe?
I used an Osprey, lightweight, small, just the max was 17 pounds of what I carried. So It wasn't very large. I carried everything with me.
Wow, incredible. And did you use that in Britain also?
Yes, I also used on that. But on those particular trips, you didn't have to carry all your food or camping gear per se, just basically clothing, water, snacks.
Right. So less of a consideration. And David, Marianne, what kind of packs do you use?
I use an internal frame Osprey pack. You're usually going to be looking for a pack in the 65 to 70 liter range if you're going to be going on something like a week-long trip, a typical national outing trip. So if you're going to do a longer trip, don't go too small on the size. Oftentimes people will say, well, hey, you should have a small backpack because then you won't be tempted to carry too much weight. And there's some truth to that. But the counter to that is if your pack is too small, in the mornings when you're trying to get going on a group trip, there's usually a deadline, and you're going to be so involved in just trying to precisely pack that pack to get everything in. So I do recommend getting a pack of adequate size. Another key thing to know about a pack is that a pack should be fitted to you. So while you may be tempted just to order a pack on the internet, and some of the companies that are internet only try to guide you on how to select the right size for yourself, it can be really important to buy a pack in person if you have that option and that's available to you for the pack you want, and to have someone help you fit that pack.
And Marianne, what do you use?
I have, and I haven't been backpacking for about 6 years, so I don't have the latest equipment. I have an REI internal frame pack, store brand. It's a little heavier than most of the current lightweight, ultralight packs, but it is a large one, similar to this picture with the top strapped on part that the little thing that straps on at the top usually has zippers in it to put some of your day stuff in. I would agree with Dave. The fit is extremely important. And if you're on a national trip, you're probably going to get you're going to get some of the KP stuff, some of the kitchen commissary. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. You're going to get some of the commissary, and you may get a great big old bear can to stick in your pack. And if you're trying to fiddle around with fitting a bear can in your pack along with your own stuff, you're going to be struggling. So a nice roomy pack that fits you well is very important.
And I also have a basic REI internal frame I got a couple of years ago, which is a nice, not too expensive pack. I've got my old external frame I love, and I refuse to give it up, and it still works fine. So for those of you that still have your external frames, don't think that somehow it's no good. There's nothing wrong with it. It works just fine. So things to consider. Tents. Size, 1 person or 2 person, whether we go to some kind of a bivy bag or other shelter, as Carla has touched upon. Weight, and should we go ultra light? What are our thoughts on this? Dave, you want to start us off? What kind of tent do you use?
I use a single person Nemo tent, and that's appropriate to someone my age who packs by himself. Do not buy a bigger tent just in case and then be saddled with that weight. So this is one of the key mistakes people make. They do sell backpacking tents that are big, that weigh 4 or 5 or 6 pounds. And those could be used for a trip where you just go in a day to a lake and maybe do some day hikes. But if you're a single backpacker, and especially if you're over 40 years of age, just get yourself the minimum tent. And
Carla, do you still use kind of a bivy stack system, or have you switched to a tent?
No, actually the bivy bag and the tarp shelter was what I used when I did a lot of my backpacking up in Washington. But no, now I do a lot of family backpacking, and what's nice about that is we can share the load on the tent. So usually I'll carry the sticks. My husband will carry the rest of the tent. We like to go in with a kind of a dome style tent because we also have a dog and a kid that are usually tagging along. So we need something a little more spacious. So now we've gone to a dome style tent for backpacking. And because we can split the weight, it's kind of nicer to be able to do that. But I know I talked about that they have these what I call coffin tents. They're very small 1-person tents, which work out great. I had a problem with those because I'm a little claustrophobic, and that's why the bivy bag and the tarp shelter worked best for me when I was younger.
Right. Good ideas all. Boots and clothing. Let's talk a little bit about boots and shoes, and also jackets and other layers. Joe and Marianne, do you want to start off talking about what kind of boots you prefer? Or do you go with boots or ultralight trail shoes, or what's your pleasure for backpacking?
I really like a heavy boot. Well, that's what I've been using, is a heavy boot that goes over the ankle. I'm a little bit older though, so I want that kind of ankle support. But lately I've been trying to go into a lighter boot that still covers the ankle. Boots are almost a personal thing. It's what you're comfortable with.
Right. Right, right.
And I'm on the same page as Joe there with wanting a boot over the ankles that gives some support, and a boot that's designed for backpacking that's helps with some of that extra weight. You're not usually walking around with an extra 30 or 40 pounds on your back, and the heavier boots are constructed, when you buy them, they'll tell you this is a backpacking boot or it's not. And if it's a backpacking boot, it's going to have more support and more cushioning. So it's worth it to get a nice over the ankle backpacking boot, especially if you're a little bit on the older side.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Dave, can you tell us, switching to clothing and jackets and layering systems, what kind of a layering system do you use, Dave, starting with your rainproof layer and then moving down toward your body in terms of like puffies or fleece? How do you structure your layers for backpacking?
So I personally really recommend people to have a rain jacket and rain pants rather than my prejudiced word is going to be making do with a poncho. If you do get a poncho, do not just get a super cheap one just because rain gear is an afterthought. But I personally believe in having a rain pants and a rain jacket. And I wear my rain pants in other circumstances. I might wear them in the tent at night if it's a cold night, and it gives you another pair of pants. In camp, I only usually bring one pair of pants. So in case I tear those or rip those, then my rain pants are my backup pair. I personally have I have a down puffy, but it's very light. It's from Western Mountaineering. So not an Alaska kind of parka for California backpacking, but just a lightweight, fairly substantial puffy, I think is ideal. I personally also carry one fleece item, which is a fleece vest that has some practical applications. If you're sitting in camp and you want to lean back against a rock, you don't want to do that with your down puffy. I have a down sweater, so typically I wear that first, the fleece vest over that. That allows me to, as I said, rest against a rock. If it's getting colder, then I'll put on my down puffy over all of that. And then my raincoat fits over my down puffy. So the ideal thing with your layering is to have a system where you can wear everything you brought, obviously not duplicate items. You're not going to wear 3 pairs of socks, but if every individual kind of thing that you brought, make sure they can all be layered together so that you can give yourself maximum weather protection.
Let's spend a minute on hats and beanies. Thoughts about hats, sun protection, beanies, and warmth on the head. Marianne and Dave, you want to talk about this for a bit?
I've been really focused on wearing a sun shirt with a hood. I think I really am glad I made that purchase. And then I find as it gets colder, it helps keep me warm. So depending on the trip, I have a balaclava as well that covers the whole head down to the neck. It's a fleece item. I found that on more moderate trips, if I wear my sun shirt into the evening and then just put a small fleece hat over my head, that is working for me. So it's a little bit of a dual use and weight savings. But a warm hat is absolutely essential and something that will keep your ears warm because your extremities are the first thing to get cold. So you do need a nice hat.
Marianne, thoughts?
Well, yes, I have not used the sun shirt thing. Those weren't so much a thing when with a hood. So that sounds like a really good solution, but you definitely want a hat that has somewhat of a brim to cover, protect you from the sun. And then there's some very nice lightweight hats for the evening that are just a little beanie that are very thin, but they're well made and they'll keep you warm. So those are important. But if I go backpacking again, I would try Dave's idea of a sun shirt with a hood.
Yeah. Lightweight works. Sleeping bags and pads. Types, do we want to go down? Do we want to go artificial material? Sizes and shapes of sleeping bags, temperature ratings, and types of pads, inflatable or non-inflatable. What are our thoughts? Carla, do you want to start?
I think you need to really know your body really well, know which parts get cold at night. For me, my feet get really cold. So not only do I have a 2-bag system, I have a summer bag that I slide into a winter bag, because I just tend to get really cold at night, no matter where I am. Also, my feet, I keep a little a little sleeping bag for my feet as well. I find I have these down booties that I wear at night, to help with my feet. So I think when you're looking at getting your bag, getting your sleep system, it's good to know which body parts tend to be cold. Some people have cold hands. They like to wear, extra layer on their hands, even in their sleeping bags.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about sleeping pads. We want to get up off the cold ground. So do we use inflatable or non-inflatable? Joe, Dave?
Well, I've used both. Yeah, and I really like the lightweight inflatable that has a good insulation rating. And the important thing is lightweight. Dave?
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I think the lightweight inflatable pads, ones that are little, like 10 ounces, right in that range, are really a nice product. They really help keep you warm. They're very comfortable. Prior to that, for many years, I just used a 1/4-inch foam pad. There are pads that are more car camping oriented that are heavy. So don't get one of those, get one of the backpacking oriented pads like we see on the screen that's about 10 or 11 ounces. The advantage of those is you can't really use them around camp to lie around on, around the, when we had campfires, that kind of thing, when you're socializing because you put a hole in it. So the one good thing about a foam pad is you can abuse it and use it throughout the day, but I go with an inflatable pad.
Right. Kitchen gear, stoves. People have a lot of different systems for this. Carla, why don't we start? What's your system?
Yeah, so I just have a small little backpacking stove that I hook onto my canister, my gas canister. That seems to work out really well for me. I have one pot. I have I just have one pot for boiling water. Most of the food that I do just requires boiled water. There have been a couple trips that I did go on where I didn't use the stove at all. I did what's called cold soak. So I soaked all my food in cold water because it was going to be warm out. But when it's going to be cold, I definitely recommend bringing a stove so you can get that added warmth with the hot water.
Joe, what's your system?
Well, I used to use a little Estet because it was lightweight, but in the past few trips, it's been so windy, I switched to a jet boil, and those work very well.
I have a jet boil too. I love it. Just love it. So, Dave, any thoughts?
I think most new backpackers or people who backpack, say, one trip a year, should just get a very simple butane stove. There are gasoline stoves out there, but if you don't backpack frequently, they're a little tricky to know how to operate. I personally have a gasoline stove, but I've added a butane one now. And just for a beginning backpacker, butane is the way to go.
Right.
And I'll put in just another plug for the national trips. Going on a national Sierra Club trip, there's some beginner backpack ones. You don't have to worry about the stove. That's part of the commissary that the leaders bring, and you'll get to see other folks using stoves and how they're used, and the cautions and all that sort of thing, without having to try it yourself for the first time. Can't say enough about the national trips.
Right. Yeah. And it's so much fun to compare gear and see how people do things. So really fun. Food. Commercial versus off the shelf in the supermarket versus dehydrating or making your own. What are our thoughts? Carla, do you want to start us off?
I never went for the commercial expensive backpacking food. I always majority of my food, what I do is I go onto YouTube and I look at what other people are doing, how they're packing their food, how they're making creations, just going to the grocery store. You know, there's something called a ramen bomb that's you know, supposed to be just really incredible if you're really hungry on a backpacking trip. It's just top ramen and instant potatoes, and you mix it all together, and it's like gourmet. So you know, I definitely recommend people doing their own research. Also know what you enjoy eating. Don't be taking stuff that, oh, you should, you know, healthy stuff that you want to eat, but maybe is not good to your palate. You know, it's okay to splurge a little bit. You are burning calories. You know, bring a Snickers bar if you want to, or, you know, the trail mix with the M&Ms in it. And you want to enjoy. It's all about enjoying your surroundings and enjoying your experience. So bring things that you like to eat.
Great idea. Great idea. Dave, what's your experience been with food, and what's your experience been with some of the national trips with food that you've led?
I want to echo what Carla said about bringing enough food to fuel the fire. So when we're backpacking, it's not the same as some of the things we have in mind when we're sitting at home in front of the computer. On a backpack trip, you need fat, you need olive oil, you need protein, carbohydrates. You have to fuel the fire. So nutrition is actual food. On the national trips, in general, we try to get our food from the supermarket, from Winco, from Trader Joe's. So you can backpack with food. It's dried food, of course, but like couscous, hummus, pasta that you get from the supermarket. But if you're a beginning backpacker and you're just a little bit overwhelmed by all of this, I think it's perfectly fine to get some of the products, the freeze-dried products, especially for dinner. I'm a vegetarian. I like the Good To Go brand from REI. They have a lot of good vegetarian choices, and the quality of that food has really improved. So I think it's, if you're a beginning backpacker, you can start there. You can have a long-term goal to learn to cook more like home food on the trail.
I would add, I keep a little stockade of the REI commercial food as kind of an earthquake stockade. So that's, you know, I dip into it as my backpacking, you know, you keep an eye on the expiration dates, of course, but my backpacking food, but I've got a box with some of this food in it. And it's just, as Dave said, it's very easy, but it's pricey. So you got to keep that in mind too. There's a lot cheaper ways of doing it. So just kind of, decide which way you want to go, and whether you want to try just mac and cheese and doctor it up, or you want to try the REI ready-made stuff. Let's talk just a minute about bear canisters, because that's really important. Dave and Joe, you want to talk a little bit about that and how your bear system?
Well, some places you have to take the bear canisters.
Yeah.
If you know, bear country. You don't need them in every situation. There's some parks you're not going to see bears, so they're not required. You can take rat sacks, something to keep the critters away from the food. But you know, they have all different size bear canisters. Depends on how long your trip is. Dave?
Yeah. For typical week-long trip, you're going to need. I'm just sort of holding my hands up here. You're going to need one of these fairly large canisters, and that will normally hold food for typical person for a week. You can sort of push it to 8 days, 9 days with some extra careful packing, but typically that a full-size bear can would be good for a week. I personally have gotten used to the convenience of a bear can. You know, so even in an area where they might, say in the South Sierra Wilderness, you'll probably find you might be going to an area where technically they're not required. But rather than go through throwing the rock over the tree system and then having the inconvenience of not being able to access food, or finding that you've got something you really intended to put in there, I've just gotten used to using a bear can, unless I'm in an area such as the Ruby Mountains in northern Nevada near Elko, where there just aren't any bears. But aside from that, I just use a bear can everywhere, except Joshua Tree, as Joe mentioned, you can use a rat sack, but in the Sierras, I'm using a bear can.
Yeah. Okay, toiletries and hygiene. Let's talk a little bit about leave no trace and basic hygiene. and maybe even some COVID considerations. Carla, you want to start us off?
Yeah, most of my trips were kind of short, 2 to 4 nights out on the trail. So bringing a lot of hygiene products just wasn't really necessary. But I definitely recommend bringing products that are not scented because, people don't realize, that, oh, I better put that coconut lotion in my bear canister because the bear might be attracted to that scent. So I do recommend if you are going to bring hygiene stuff like deodorant, lotions, stuff like that, make sure you bring non-scented. And yeah, just follow all the rules when it comes to bearing your waste. Make sure you're so far. I think it's like you're supposed to be 200 feet away from any stream, any water source, and off the trail 200 feet as well.
Right. And packing out toilet paper is
Absolutely.
a good thing. Dave, you want to talk about your system for that?
Well, normally I bring a Ziploc bag. On a national outing trip, like Mary Ann said, you'll get a brown Ziploc bag, which is aesthetically more pleasing. But the toilet paper does not stay buried. So it's really important to pack that out. When you are on a trip, especially if you're in a group trip, keeping your hands clean is really important. And you should have some soap. The leader may provide some. On a typical national outing trip, we have a dromedary bag, which is a water source. Then we have a soap source right there. And you want to wash your hands so that they're physically clean. They look clean till you get that dirt off. And then also on a national outing trip, we'll have an alcohol source to put that on as well. So we use both soap and alcohol.
Right. And do we have any COVID considerations? Have you guys worked that into your family trips? I know we're still on hiatus or from the Sierra Club, but on your private trips, what have you done for COVID? Are you masking? Are you upping your hand sanitizer? What have your hygiene considerations been?
I think for our family, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Carla.
I think for our family, we have included a bottle of hand sanitizer. Each one of us has a little one of those little bottles that we hook onto our backpacks. And we have up that. We're also focusing on going places where there's not going to be crowds, where it's not going to be a busy trail. It's not a real, Instagrammable destination. We're going to be going somewhere that's kind of off the beaten path.
Yeah. So less crowds.
Julianne, I was on a recent Sierra Club National trip. It wasn't a backpack. It was similar though, because it was all wilderness. It was a raft trip though, so I didn't have to carry stuff. The boat carried it, but very similar camping situation. And the hand washing before the hand washing station is right at the food area. And one thing that people sometimes forget is when you're sharing food like a bag of chips or something, don't just reach in and grab it, pour it into your hand. When you're sharing M&Ms, pour it into your hand. Don't reach in the bag and grab chips. So there's little considerations like that, but on this trip, there were no mask requirements or anything like that because we were all outdoors and everyone was vaccinated on this trip. So that was a consideration.
Good. Okay. That's going to be more and more, I think. Water purification and storage. Let's talk a little bit about the traditional pump system that we see pictured, and maybe some of the new squeeze systems and some of the tablet systems. Joe, you want to start us off?
Oh, I've gone through the whole evolution of those systems, the pumps and the straws and the squeeze bottles. They all work fine. The pumps, you have all these little units to work with, but I found that the squeeze bottles are very effective, very nice. I mean, you can use the little EpiPen, or not the EpiPens, but those little electropens too.
Interesting. Carla, do you want to talk about your method of, keeping the different parts of the pump system sanitary and separate?
Yeah, I've always had the pump. I would love to move to the squeeze system, but haven't gotten there yet. I recommend bringing two small Ziploc bags. I label one clean, one dirty, and I always put the dirty side of the hose that goes into the stream. I always put that, zip it into the dirty Ziploc bag, and I put the clean one that goes into my bottle into the clean bag. You always want to keep them separate because there are things like Giardia and other things that could be in the water. So you always want to be careful of that.
Do you guys keep a set of tablets in your 10 essentials or in your emergency bags as a backup?
I do. Even for day hikes, I keep water purification tablets in my
Yeah.
first aid kit, just in case of emergencies. I think it's important.
Yeah. Okay. Navigation, map and compass, and GPS. Dave, you want to start us off? Do you keep both systems on your person? Do you favor one over the other? What's your system?
I like having both systems. So I typically have a large scale map like the National Geographic map that you see in your picture, or a Tom Harrison map. One fire safety thing that could be pertinent to that is that if you need to go a different direction and your maps maybe only cover the exact area you're in, your detailed maps, you may be limited there. So a large scale map I think is helpful. I like to buy a regular scale topo map, but instead of the many individual topo maps, I go online to mytopo.com, and I order a custom map that's at normal topo map scale because my eyes are calibrated to that, but more specific to the area that I'm going to be in. I do like having a GPS as well. I simply use my phone. I bring a backup battery for it, and because of national outings where we're trying to be on one system, I use Gaia. I'm not saying it's good or bad, just that's the one that we use. A key thing to understand is to make sure that you have your map data downloaded to your phone. And when you have internet access, it can be a little difficult to confirm that you really do have that map data downloaded for when you are not going to have internet access. So put your phone in airplane mode, or some other time when you're out in the mountains and you don't have internet access, make sure you have the data for the area that you're going to be in.
Okay. All very practical, good considerations.
I guess I would add
Lights,
too.
headlamps. Go ahead.
I guess one thing I should add is if you're a new backpacker, don't challenge yourself too much on navigation as you start out. Go to a popular area or go on a national outing trip, as Marianne has mentioned, and try to learn about maps and navigation. And leaders love to talk about navigation. So you could use that as an opportunity to get a week-long tutorial.
Great idea. Yes. Map and compass. And there are also good classes at REI.
Yes.
And online resources too. And now National Outdoor Leadership School has a wonderful text just on navigation, NOLS. Anyway, lights, headlamps, solar lighting. What is our system? Joe, what kind of lighting system do you use? And Carla?
Both of those pictured there, the little Lucy lights for camping and the headlamps for, I carry them all the time. Because you never know when you're going to a little cave or dark areas, but they're excellent.
Okay. Carla?
Yeah, I make sure that everyone has their own headlamp and extra batteries if they require. And I always use a solar lamp. I use the Lucy. I hook it onto the back of my backpack, and that's just kind of like our camping light, our kitchen light, like a multi-purpose light. But I make sure that everybody has a headlamp and extra batteries.
Good idea. Good idea. Survival and first aid. Essentials, obviously. a first aid kit of some size, a tool, and matches. Dave, you want to talk about what type of first aid kit and supplies you bring as a leader, both locally and nationally?
On a national outing trip, they provide us with a quite large, well-equipped first aid kit. The things I have found most useful are actually the basic items. The tape that I'm blanking out on the name, but they provide us Zonas tape. That's the name. A very nice tape for blisters, and I buy the same tape myself for my personal use. Medications, ibuprofen, just basic medications can be helpful. Bring those for participants, in case people ask me for them. And the ability to clean a wound and bandage a basic wound. Those are the things that I'm looking for. Steri strips, some of the topical antibiotic solutions. Just, I think the basics are key.
Okay. Carla, anything to add to that?
I would add tweezers. If you didn't say it,
Tweezers,
maybe
yeah.
I
Yeah.
missed it, but yeah, tweezers.
Yeah, I think it's important to have foot care stuff as well, especially if you're going on long hikes in between your camping areas. Make sure you have lots of foot care.
Yeah, good. Okay. Getting toward the end of our presentation, but we did want to touch on these things. Obviously, each of these items in backpacking skills is like a multi-layered course. So especially things like navigation, but things that you do need to be aware of and educate yourself about, how to pack your pack, how to lift your pack on your back, how to hike with a fully loaded pack. That's optimal. Navigation, understanding weather, choosing a campsite, being aware of wildlife, bears, and first aid. Can somebody just say a few words about wilderness first aid? Dave?
Well, I think those courses are worthwhile. If you go on an organized trip like a Sierra Club trip, you're going to get leaders that have some first aid training, which you may or may not get on a meetup trip. For national outings trips, the leaders have to have wilderness first aid, which is a 2.5, 3-day course. And many land agencies require a wilderness first responder, which is an 80-hour course, Inyo, Joshua Tree, and so forth. So I think any first aid classes that you can learn are worthwhile. Those are offered in general in the Southern California area, and also up in Idlewild. Wilderness Medical Associates offers classes there.
Okay. Flip side, I get a lot of questions about how to pack your backpack. Can we talk a little bit about weight distribution and your particular methods? Carla, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. That's like, that will determine whether you have a good experience or not, whether your backpack is balanced. I think it's important to, take it apart, put it together in different ways to see what distributes the weight the best, which way to pack your pack distributes the weight the best. You do want it distributed equally on each side. So take in consideration how that's done, and you'll have a better experience if it's balanced.
Yeah. Joe?
Oh yeah, I've gone through the experiences where I've unbalanced my pack, and it doesn't feel good. And it just take a little extra time. Make sure your pack feels good.
Yeah. Good idea. Okay. Special considerations that I want to touch on before we left. Backpacking with children, backpacking abroad, and backpacking in large groups. Let's start with backpacking with children. Can we talk a bit about how we get children used to backpacking? And Carla, you may want to chime in about this, and special considerations during the backpacking trip with kids.
Yeah, that's a real important one, especially if you have kids. I find that kids do better when they're around other kids. So if you are going to go on a backpack, go on like a family backpack with another family, or on a backpack that is, maybe offered through the Sierra Club that's going to be kid friendly. The kids tend to enjoy it better when they have other kids with them. The other thing is, you want your kid to have a really good experience. So for my kid, he doesn't like to carry a heavy backpack. So me and my husband distribute a lot of his stuff, and he carries, water, snacks. And I always let him take some sort of special item. He likes to take like what he calls a plushie. It's like a stuffed animal. And also, I did a lot of research on games that you can play while you're walking. You could play the alphabet nature game, where you identify different things with the first letter of the alphabet, and each person takes a turn. Just keep them engaged is really important. And you really want to have them you really want them to have a good experience.
Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about backpacking abroad on the Camino and at Hadrian's Wall?
Well, anytime you go abroad, it's really important to do some research on it, because especially overseas, they have a strong culture in backpacking. So a lot of times things are set up really nice. There's huts at certain distances. You can time it so that there's places to stay, so you don't have to really worry too much about that. But it's a lot has to do with research, organizing beforehand.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And backpacking in large groups. Marianne, do you want to chime in about that one in terms of what do's and don'ts of a large group?
Sure. All the Sierra Club trips I've been on, they're typically limited to 13 or 14 people, because that's the wilderness limit for a permit. And you want to, just realize that you're one of a group, and there's chores to be done. There's KP duty that we all each share, and there's a time to get up in the morning and get ready and be packed and ready to go. And it seems like on most trips I've been on, there's been that one person that was always the one that didn't get packed up and wasn't ready. And I never wanted to be that one. I never was, but I think it's just respectful to everyone else to get things done on time and be helpful. And I've met some lifelong friends on these trips. So it's really fun to go in a group like this. You're told ahead of time to limit your pack to 25 pounds, because when you get there, you're going to get another 15. You don't want to have more than 40 pounds on an 8-day backpack. So you want to follow the rules. First trip I went on, somebody showed up with 45 pounds in his pack before we even started. And the leaders would weigh your pack and said, okay, this make you take stuff out. So just listen to the leaders, and you'll have a much better time. And be prepared physically too. You don't want to be the one that causes problems or holds up the group.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. All right, onward. So my thanks to our wonderful panel. So thank you all, Marianne, Dave, Joe, Carla, John, thank you for your expertise. If there are any other questions, please let us know, audience. And we enjoyed putting.
Oh, sorry. There's one question in the chat here.
Yes.
We've got a question here about cleaning sanitation for your water bladder if you're out for several days. Like if you have your own water bladder, how do you clean it? Keep it clean.
Dave, thoughts?
I just use water bottles, so I'm not the one for this question.
Yeah, me too. I've tried the other system, and I just do not like it when I'm out for any length of time. I'd rather just I figure if I can't stop long enough to get my water bottle out and take a drink, I'm not enjoying the hike.
Joe, Carla, do either of you use the bladders with the long tubing?
Yes, I've used it before. If you have a filter, you have clean water there. You can always run it through, or rinse it out that way too.
Right.
But
right.
Normally, if it's clean beforehand, it'll stay pretty clean into the hike, into the trip.
Right. How do you, what's your method of cleaning the tubing? Do you use the little brush that you can buy for the platypus?
I wait till I get home.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then use that long brush. There's that long brush that you can
Yeah.
use to get the tubing clean. And I know there are also, some people even use bleach, a bleach solution to clean it out, to make it extra sanitary. There are different methods, and you can look online also to see what, and also the platypus, that's one of the most popular browns.
Mhm.
Anyway, other questions? All right. Do join us next month, and that will be October the 20th, Wednesday, October the 20th at 7 p.m. We'll be joined by Hillary Holt, who is one of the administrators and outings leaders for the Catalina Island Conservancy. And she's going to be talking to us about what to expect on the Trans Catalina Trail. So again, as I mentioned previously, the LA Times, there's an LA Times article that came out last Saturday just on that topic. It's on it's called "You Never Walk on Flat Ground." So, and Mary Forgione, who is the LA Times hiking columnist, wrote it, and it details the full 38 miles of the Trans Catalina Trail. Hillary will tell you everything you need to know. The Catalina Islands Conservancy runs all the backland there on the island, and they have a visitor center where you can get your permits and information and equipment if you need to, and you can there is a hardware store there in Avalon where you can pick up fuel because you can't bring it on the boat coming over. Hiking there is glorious. The little harbor and 2 harbors, beautiful camping, and all the trail in between. I highly recommend it, especially in spring or fall. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience. So please join us next month, and we can listen to Hillary tell us what to expect from the Trans Catalina Trail. I think we are pretty well done, so I am ready to sign off. John, can you take it away?
Yeah, so I'm seeing people are saying thank you, great trail talk, excited for next time, thank you. I don't see any more questions, so I think we probably are about done. And I want to thank all of the members of the panel for doing a fantastic job. Very, very complete coverage of the topic. I'm impressed. This will be a wonderful resource to have on our YouTube channel.
I think so too. And thank you for everyone for all of your expertise. Just wonderful. And so much more we can go into, but this is a nice introduction. So,
Yes,
all right.
it's fun.
Very much fun.
Okay, so I think I'm going to hit the stop recording button.